She was ready to give up the land, the livestock, the life that had slowly broken her. But when a wild Mustang appears outside her window, watching her, waiting, Clara Holt follows. What she finds hidden in the Colorado mountains will shatter everything she thought she knew about her family, her farm, and herself. The frost hadn't melted in 3 days. It clung to the wire fencing and curled along the edges of Clara Holt's coat like something that wouldn't let go. She stood near the paddock gate, boots planted in the brittle grass, eyes locked on the barn she had rebuilt the summer after her father passed. The wood had grayed since then. A few slats were warped now, one shutter hung crooked, but the shape of it, the bones, were still hers. She wrapped her arms around herself. The wind wasn't cruel, just indifferent. That was worse. A still, quiet kind of cold that didn't bite, only watched you weaken. The land had always taken more than it gave. 3 straight years of drought, feed bills that stacked higher than hope, a bank account emptied by hard choices, and no more cattle. She had sold the last head 2 weeks ago to a rancher out in Gunnison, watched the trailer pull away while keeping her face flat, unreadable. The only thing that had ever looked back at her that long was the lead cow, eyes wide, uncertain. Tonight would be her last in the house. The truck was already loaded. A friend in Taos had offered her a room and a job, something with air conditioning and hours that didn't start before sunrise. She should have felt relieved, but the ache was thick in her chest, like something left unfinished. The sun was bleeding out across the hills when she saw it, a shape, still, beyond the last stretch of fence where her property met the brush line. She squinted through the dusk. A horse. No bridle, no rope. Its coat was dappled with soot gray and silver, like storm clouds layered over bone, muscles carved under fur that hadn't known shelter. Its mane flicked in the breeze, tangled and wild, and it was watching her. Clara didn't move. Neither did it. She had seen wild horses before, sure, off in the canyons or along the river bend, but never here. Not this close, not at this hour, and never one that just stood. For a moment, the air felt charged, electric, like lightning was coming, but hadn't chosen a place to land yet. The horse didn't flinch when she took a step forward, didn't bolt when she whispered, "You lost." It just looked at her, unblinking, like it had been waiting. By the time the sky went full black, the Mustang had turned and disappeared into the trees. Clara stood alone, her breath fogging up in front of her, a whisper in the silence. She didn't know why, but a thought struck her hard and fast, like something old waking up. Don't leave yet. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't want to. The morning came gray and still, no wind, no birdsong, just the slow drip of thawing icicles tapping against the porch rail. Clara wrapped her flannel tighter and stepped outside, boots crunching on the thin crust of snow that had fallen overnight. That's when she saw them. Hoof prints, not the scattered trampling of cattle or the sure strides of her old gelding. These were different, deep, singular, deliberate, a single set, pressed clean into the snow just beyond the porch steps. She followed the trail with her eyes. It curved gently around the barn, then veered toward the tree line. Her father always called the edge. Clara stared for a long moment. Her father used to say nothing good came from the northern woods. The land sloped strange there. The trees grew too close together, roots twisted like old scars. Once, as a girl, she'd wandered close and gotten turned around in minutes. It had taken her hours to find her way back, and she never forgot the way her father looked at her that day. Not angry, just afraid. She should have turned back, but her feet moved anyway, past the gate, past the fence, each step cracking against the snow-covered grass. The prints were fresh, recent enough that the cold hadn't softened their edges. She followed them through the thicket, where light barely touched the ground. The woods were silent. Every branch seemed to watch her. The air thickened, wrapped around her like breath held too long. She ducked under low-hanging limbs, boots dragging through shallow drifts, eyes scanning for movement. But the prints were clear, winding like a thread through a place she hadn't dared step in years. A crow called once, sharp and sudden, then silence again. Clara's breath came heavy now. She wasn't used to the climb, the incline growing steeper with every few paces. Her legs burned, but she didn't stop. Something was pulling her forward, past reason, past sense. And then the trees parted. She stood on the edge of a narrow trail, half buried under snow and forgotten time. Moss crept up stone markers she hadn't noticed until now. their surfaces etched with something that looked worn, but familiar. Her father's brand. No, older, rougher. The hoofprints continued up the path, fading slightly where the snow was deeper, but still there, still leading. Clara looked back once, toward where the woods swallowed the light, where her cabin stood somewhere behind all that silence. She didn't know why, but her hands were trembling, and still she stepped forward, toward the mountain, toward the unknown, toward the thing her blood couldn't name, but her bones already knew. The trees thickened as the trail narrowed, roots knotting beneath Clara's boots like warnings. Breath fogged at her lips, heartbeat too loud in her ears. She pushed on, brushing aside frozen ferns and brittle limbs that clawed at her coat. The hoofprints were harder to see now, broken by rock and ice, but something deeper kept her going, a hum in the chest, quiet but constant, like a low drum calling her forward. Then she saw them. 2 stone pillars rising out of the ground like the last teeth of something ancient. Moss clung to their sides, and ivy had curled itself into the cracks like veins. They didn't belong here. Not in this stretch of untamed wilderness. Not this tall, not this human. She stepped closer. The surface of the left pillar was chipped and worn, but something caught her eye near the base, a carved symbol, barely visible under the dirt and lichen. Her hand reached for it without thinking. She wiped it clean, breath-catching. The Holt brand, clear as day. The same one burned into every fence post back on Red Hollow. The same one her father had traced with his finger, the day he handed her the deed. "This means the land stays in our blood," he'd said. But this wasn't part of their land. Not officially, not on any map she'd ever seen. Clara stepped back, a chill spidering down her spine. Her throat tightened. Nothing about this felt right, and yet she didn't turn back. The air beyond the pillars was colder, somehow, still, like the forest on that side breathed differently. The trail passed between them, leading upward into shadows. Her boots crunched forward on instinct, more than choice. And then, movement. To her left, above the ridge, she turned, and there it was, the Mustang. Its coat shimmered like dusk smoke in the slant of pale light breaking through the trees. It stood perfectly still on a patch of frost-covered rock, head lifted, watching her. No fear, no urgency, just presence, like it had been expecting her. Clara met its gaze. The silence between them stretched, full of something too old to name. Then slowly, the Mustang turned. Its hooves moved without sound, and it vanished through the stone gate. Clara stood frozen, heart pounding so hard it hurt. She could leave now. She could go back, pretend none of this had happened, tell herself it was a trick of grief, or cold or exhaustion. But the earth beneath her feet felt different now, like it remembered something. She stepped between the pillars. The wind shifted, and the trail ahead waited. The climb burned in her legs, frost clinging to her scarf and lashes. The trail had thinned to barely a suggestion, swallowed in places by snowdrifts and stubborn brush. Clara didn't speak, didn't think. She just moved, higher, forward, toward whatever it was the land seemed to be holding like a breath. Then suddenly, the trees opened. She stepped through, and gasped. Before her stretched a wide, sloping meadow bathed in a hush so deep it felt sacred. Snow dusted the tall grass, but not evenly, as if something old and warm still pulsed just beneath the earth. Pines circled the clearing like quiet sentries, and beyond them the mountains stood watch, cold and eternal. In the center stood a cabin, stone, sagging slightly, roof patched in places with tin. A single chimney pointed skyward like a finger raised in warning or prayer. It looked forgotten, untouched for decades, but not ruined, just waiting. And beside it stood the Mustang. It didn't move when Clara stepped into the open. Its head turned slightly, mane fluttering in the breeze. Its eyes met hers again, calm and endless. Then it turned away, not to leave but to stand beside the cabin door like a sentinel. Clara approached slowly, her boots pressed into the snow, crunching just loud enough to remind her she was still real. The air was thin here, but sharp, cleansing in a way that scraped the lungs clean. She placed a hand on the cabin door. The wood was cold, splintered at the edges. It creaked open with a low groan, spilling the scent of dust, stone, and something older than either. Inside, time had folded in on itself. A single chair sat beneath a window smudged with age. Shelves lined one wall, their contents slumped and yellowed. An iron stove stood cold in the corner. On the table a bundle of letters bound with twine, the paper curled and brittle. Beside them a box of photographs, sepia faces staring out, caught mid-smile or mid-sorrow. Clara reached for the top letter, hands shaking. The ink had faded, but the signature hadn't. Mabel Holt. She blinked. Her father had never spoken the name. She moved to the far wall where a saddle hung on rusted hooks. Its leather was cracked, stiff with time. She brushed the dust away and found it the same brand as her father's, pressed deep into the flank. Her chest tightened. Mabel Holt. A Holt, like her, erased somehow, but present. Here, in this hidden place the Mustang had led her to. Clara stepped back into the doorway, eyes scanning the meadow again. The Mustang stood still, watching, breathing, and deep inside her something shifted. Not fear, not grief, recognition. The letters were fragile, the paper thin as old skin. Clara sat cross-legged on the dusty cabin floor, the bundle in her lap trembling slightly in her hands. She undid the twine slowly, afraid the slightest rush might turn them to ash. Each envelope was addressed in looping script, ink faded to a soft brown, the kind that told you truth had waited a long time to be heard. The first line gripped her chest. If you're reading this, then time did what people couldn't. Let the truth breathe. They were signed Mabel Holt, one after the other. Some were addressed to no one, others to a sister. A child, one, simply, to the one who comes after me. Clara read until her legs ached beneath her. Mabel's voice was steady, restrained, but pain bled through every line. She wrote of land handed down with terms not spoken aloud, of deals made behind closed doors, of a brother, Clara's grandfather, who carved the family name into county ledgers, while carving Mabel out completely, because she'd spoken up, because she'd fallen in love with someone who wasn't welcome, because she had a child, and refused to pretend she hadn't. Clara's breath hitched as the names unraveled. There had been another heir, a claim lost not by law but by silence. Mabel had been pushed from the story like a stone from a boot. Quiet, deliberate, final. Clara's own bloodline, her inheritance, had come at the cost of a woman's erasure, a child hidden, a truth buried under generations of rewritten memory. She paused, hands in her lap, staring at the flicker of late light on the cabin floor. Her father had never mentioned Mabel, not once. No photographs, no stories, not even a name tucked into the corners of old conversations. And yet, here she was, in her cabin, reading her words, sitting on land that once may have belonged to her. Clara picked up the next letter. Her fingers no longer trembled. They burned. With each page the image sharpened. This place, this family, had been built on omission, on convenience, on the kind of betrayal that didn't scream, it just erased. She looked up at the saddle on the wall, the branded leather dark in the shadows. That mark she had once believed meant pride now felt like a scar. Outside the meadow was still. The Mustang stood at the edge of the clearing again, half veiled in the dusk, mane catching the last gold of the sun. It hadn't left, hadn't turned away. It watched her with the patience of something that had seen generations rise and fall. Clara felt the truth settle in her bones, not like a burden, but like a compass. The story she'd been told was only half of one, and now she knew which half was missing. The morning broke quiet, mist curling low over the meadow like breath that hadn't yet let go. Clara stirred from the old cot inside the cabin, her dreams still tangled with names and places she couldn't quite place. The letters sat in a neat stack beside her, bound again with care, but their weight had changed. They didn't just whisper secrets now, they demanded direction. The Mustang was there again, standing beneath the ash tree on the far edge of the clearing, not grazing, not moving, just watching. Clara stepped outside, boots crunching over frost-laced grass. She walked toward it without fear, this time, as if the air between them had already introduced their names. The Mustang blinked once, then turned and moved slowly around the wide base of the tree. Clara followed. The ash tree was massive, its trunk split near the base, roots like knotted arms stretching into the earth. One side of it dipped unnaturally into the hill, swallowed partly by brush and fallen stone. But there, hidden in shadow and tangled vine, was an opening. A cave, narrow and low, just wide enough to crawl through. Clara paused. The Mustang stood to the side now, eyes level with hers. Then it turned and walked away without sound. She didn't call after it. She didn't need to. Clara crouched and slipped inside. The air changed instantly. Cooler, older. The cave sloped down gently, the rock damp and lined with moss. Her flashlight cut through the dark, revealing shelves carved into the stone, tucked and hidden like someone had built a library for secrets. She found ledgers first, handwritten, brittle, maps marked with borders that didn't match any she'd ever seen, names crossed out, parcels transferred without signature. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mabel's. And then the box. A metal container, sealed shut but not locked. She lifted it with both hands, its weight dense with promise. Dust clung to her gloves as she pried it open. Inside, a folded paper on top, a birth certificate. Her breath caught. The mother's name, Mabel Louise Holt. The child's name, Eliza Holt. Clara stared at the name for a long time. Her grandmother. Everything shifted. The ledger in her blood redrew itself. She wasn't descended from the patriarch her father idolized, not from the man who built the fences and barns and legacy with stone and silence. She was Mabel's, the woman who had been cast out, rewritten, erased. At the bottom of the box was a journal, its leather cover cracked, Mabel's name etched deep into the front. Clara clutched it to her chest. The cave seemed to breathe around her. This was the truth, not whispered, not hidden, just waiting for someone who'd listen. The storm came fast, rolling in like a breath held too long. One moment, the sky was bruised with distant clouds. The next, it was white, roaring, blinding, absolute. Snow drove sideways across the meadow, hammering the cabin's stone walls with a fury that felt personal. Clara barred the door just in time. Inside, the cold crept in through the cracks, but she fed the fire until it glowed hot and steady. The wind howled around the eaves, rattling the glass with each gust. She wrapped herself in a wool blanket, Mabel's journal clutched in her lap, the tin box open on the table beside her. Outside, the world had disappeared. Inside, the truth filled every corner. She had read the journal cover to cover by now. Mabel's voice was sharp, unflinching. She'd written of the betrayal like a wound that never stopped bleeding. A brother who claimed her land with charm and silence, a town that turned away, a daughter, Eliza, whisked into secrecy to keep the Holt name clean. Clara pressed her forehead against the window pane, breath fogging the glass. Snow swirled beyond like ash in wind. This place, these mountains, this cabin, the land she had nearly abandoned, held more than roots. It held ghosts, and truth, and blood that had been denied its place in the ledger. Red Hollow had never been just her father's. He had inherited it on the backs of buried names, built fences on soil that wasn't his, taught her to love the land without ever telling her where it truly came from, and she had almost walked away. She turned back to the fire, eyes stinging, not from smoke but from clarity. She had sold the cattle, closed the accounts, written goodbye in her mind 100 times, but now it all felt hollow. The ache inside her wasn't weariness. It was something else, responsibility. This land wasn't hers to abandon, not anymore. It wasn't just about fixing what had been broken. It was about telling what had been silenced, about putting Mabel's name back where it belonged, about acknowledging Eliza, about reclaiming a truth that had been twisted into myth. Clara stood and crossed the room. She took the ledger from the tin box, the birth certificate, the maps, laid them out on the floor like offerings. The cabin groaned in the wind. The fire popped. She didn't feel lost anymore. She felt rooted. The storm outside screamed like something being purged. But inside, Clara was still. She knew what had to be done. The land had waited long enough. Now it was her turn to speak. The snow stopped sometime before dawn. Clara woke to a world softened and buried. The storm's rage replaced by a hushed, endless white. The sky was pale and wide, clouds hanging low like they hadn't quite finished what they came to do. She packed the journal, the letters, the ledger, wrapped them in oilcloth, and tucked them into her bag, like sacred things. The path down the mountain was slow, the snow deep and uneven, but her legs didn't falter. Each step felt more certain than the last. Red Hollow came into view just past noon, its fields blanketed in silence, the fences, the barn, the empty paddocks. None of it looked the same anymore. It didn't feel like home. It felt like history. Clara stepped onto the porch, boots soaked and heart steady. She paused at the threshold, eyes drifting across the landscape her father had once called legacy. Now she saw it for what it truly was, a stitched-together story, built over a mission. She set the bag down and walked behind the barn. The wind was sharp back there, untouched by shelter. The ground dipped slightly near the old equipment shed, a place she was never allowed as a child. Dangerous, her father used to say. Snakes, nails, nothing worth seeing. But Clara had always wondered. She knelt and brushed aside the snow, hands numb but certain. The ground here wasn't right, too loose, too soft. She dug with gloved fingers first, then with a rusted spade she found nearby. It didn't take long. 6 inches down, her fingers hit metal, a cross, small, crooked, rusted through at the base. She lifted it gently, revealing a shallow depression beneath it, lined with old stones and collapsed wood. No coffin, just bones, weathered, settled, forgotten, a grave. Clara sat back on her heels, heart hammering like hooves on dry dirt. There was no name, no marker, just the cross, just silence. Mabel had been here all along, hidden behind the very barn. Clara had painted with her father, buried on the land she was told belonged to someone else. A woman erased not just from the family's memory, but from the earth itself. Tears came slow, not loud, just warm on her cheeks. Fears came slow, not loud, just warm on her cheeks. She touched the frozen soil, fingers shaking. "I see you now," she whispered. She didn't know what came next, not exactly, but she knew the truth had a place here, in the fields, in the fences, in the wind that still carried her name. The legacy wasn't her father's alone anymore. It never had been. It was hers now, and it would begin with a name returned to the land. The town hadn't changed. Main Street still slouched under the weight of time, storefronts leaning, windows fogged from years of breath and dust. The diner buzzed with low conversations and lukewarm coffee. The post office door creaked the same way it always had. But to Clara, it all looked different now. Smaller, less certain. She parked the truck outside the county building and sat for a moment, watching the wind spin old leaves across the pavement. Her hands were tight around the steering wheel. In the passenger seat sat the oilcloth bundle. Mabel's words, the ledger, the truth. She carried it under one arm as she stepped into the registrar's office. The man behind the desk didn't look up at first. When he did, his eyes flicked to her name, then narrowed. "Holt," he said. "Back in town." Clara nodded once. "I need to speak to someone about property records. Old ones." His jaw tightened. "Everything you need's already filed." "Not everything," she said, and set the journal down on the counter. The silence between them stretched. By mid-afternoon, word had spread. A Holt girl back in town, asking dangerous questions. Names resurfacing that hadn't been spoken in years. People started looking over their shoulders. Doors stayed closed a little longer. She went to the town council meeting that evening. 5 men in folding chairs behind a long table. A scattering of townspeople in the pews. Most of them wore faces she recognized. Older now, but still marked by the same silence that had haunted this place for decades. She stood in the front, fingers wrapped around Mabel's journal. "I found something," she began. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. Someone, eyes shifted, whispers began. She opened the journal, read the first page aloud. "This land wasn't just my father's. It wasn't even his to begin with. My great-aunt, Mabel Holt, was cast out, erased, her child hidden, her life buried." One of the men leaned forward, jaw tight. "We don't dig up the past here, Clara." She met his eyes. "Maybe that's the problem." Another voice from the back. "Why now? What good does it do?" Clara held up the ledger. "Because this isn't just memory. It's theft. It's names left out of deeds. It's a woman buried behind a barn, with no marker, and I'm not letting it stay that way." The room quieted. No one applauded. No one nodded. But no one stopped her either. When she walked out, the air felt sharper, like something had been cut loose. She didn't know if they'd listen, if anything would change. But they'd heard her, and that was how reckoning always started. The morning light came slow, spreading gold across the frost-bitten ground, like it was trying to warm the bones of the land. Clara stood in the doorway of the old farmhouse. a mug of coffee cooling in her hands, steam rising and curling into nothing. The silence was different now, not empty, just waiting. She'd barely stepped off the porch when she saw it. At the far edge of the pasture, where the snow had started to melt into soft patches of brown and green, the Mustang, no longer on the ridge, no longer watching from the distance. It was walking toward her now, hooves pressing into the thawing earth, with the quiet confidence of something that had always known where it belonged. Clara froze, breath caught somewhere between her ribs. The coffee slipped from her fingers, hitting the ground with a soft thud she barely registered. The Mustang stopped just a few feet away. Its eyes were darker than she remembered, not wild but deep, like river stones smoothed by time. It didn't shy, didn't flinch. It lowered its head. Clara reached out, slow and steady, hand trembling, not from fear but from something older, reverence, maybe, or grief. Her fingers touched its mane, thick, coarse, tangled with wind and weather, and something inside her broke open. Tears came fast, not sharp, not frantic, just real. For years she had held everything together with clenched teeth and quiet exits, held it through drought, through debt, through death, through every silence her father never filled. But now, under the rising sun and the weight of that steady gaze, it all spilled out. She didn't cry because she was tired. She cried because the weight was finally lifting. The horse stayed, breathing, solid, real, a creature born of wind and soil and truth, that didn't ask to be owned, only witnessed. Clara sank to her knees in the cold grass, the Mustang still before her. She wasn't leaving, not anymore. This land, this scarred, beautiful stretch of earth, was not her father's story. It wasn't a monument to pride or inheritance. It was a place that had held sorrow and silence, and now, finally her. She would stay, rebuild, not to restore what had been but to honor what had been forgotten. She looked up at the Mustang, the tears drying on her cheeks, her hands still tangled in its mane. "Thank you," she whispered. The wind picked up again, soft and full of memory. The Mustang turned, slow and sure, and walked toward the open field. Clara stood and followed. The snow had long since melted. Wildflowers now crept along the fence lines, curling up through the broken boards. Clara hadn't bothered to fix, not out of neglect, but because some things were better left imperfect. Honest. The air was softer these days, heavy with pine and the quiet rustle of hooves over earth. Red Hollow was no longer a farm, not anymore. It had become a refuge. The barn had been gutted, rebuilt from the inside out. Stalls lined with fresh pine shavings, feed bins stacked neat. A small wooden sign hung near the entrance. The Hollow Sanctuary, below it, in hand-carved script, two names, Mabel Holt and Clara Holt. She'd put them side by side, not to rewrite the past, but to correct it. To make space where space had been stolen. Horses came one by one. Some limped through the gates, ribs sharp, eyes dulled. Others arrived in trailers, angry and half-wild, full of a fight that had nothing to do with anyone nearby. And then there were the people, quiet ones, mostly, kids who didn't talk much, women who had stopped expecting to be heard, men who needed somewhere to put their hands that didn't involve breaking things. Clara didn't do therapy, she just let them come. She showed them how to move slow, how to listen to a horse's breath, how to stand still long enough to matter. The meadow, once hidden beyond stone pillars and silence, was now a place of gathering. The old cabin had been cleaned up, but the journal still sat on the mantel, Mabel's words untouched. Clara read it sometimes on the porch, just to remember what silence could cost. She never replaced the pillars. Instead, she built a new gate, rough cedar, no paint, no polish, just strength. On it, carved deep by her own hand, were those names, hers and Mabel's, adjoining, a reckoning, a beginning. And every so often, just as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long, the Mustang returned, never from the same direction, never with warning. It would appear at the edge of the field, just beyond where the creek curled toward the woods, stand for a moment, breathe, watch. Clara never tried to call it closer. She understood now. It wasn't meant to stay. It had never been hers to keep. Some truths, like some spirits, like some wild things, weren't meant to be held. They were meant to be honored. And when the Mustang ran, mane lifting in the wind, hooves striking the earth like thunder, Clara didn't cry, she smiled, because she finally understood what it meant to be free. If this story moved you, if the silence, the snow, and the truth under the soil stirred something in your heart, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Help bring forgotten stories like Mabel's back into the light. Leave a comment below. What part of this story hit you the hardest?